The chainsaw snarled like a wild animal tearing through wood with ruthless precision. Daniel Carter stood rooted to his driveway, eyes wide, chest tight, as the towering oak trees, planted by his late father decades ago, lay scattered across his lawn like fallen warriors. Broken trunks, jagged stumps, and trampled flower beds surrounded him. His haven of shade and memories had been reduced to a chaotic heap of sawdust and branches. A man in a bright orange vest revved the chainsaw again, aiming it at the last standing tree. "Stop!" Daniel yelled, his voice breaking with rage. The worker paused, turned, shrugged, and pointed toward a figure standing smugly at the edge of the property. Evelyn Pierce, the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood, folded her arms with a victorious grin. "They were out of compliance," she called out, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Page 47 of the HOA handbook. Trees over 15 feet within 20 feet of the curb have to go. Daniel's fists tightened. "You had no right to touch my property." Evelyn smirked. "Oh, I absolutely did. You were warned 3 times. Her words barely sank in as Daniel's gaze drifted to the empty space where his father's beloved maple once stood. That tree had shaded their chess matches, held strings of Christmas lights, and been a jungle gym for local kids. Now it was just firewood. "You'll pay for this," Daniel growled. Evelyn's smile grew. "I'd love to see you try." He stormed inside, slamming the door so hard a glass on the counter rattled. Minutes later, his friend and neighbor, Jack Ellis, burst in, breathless. "I saw it all," Jack said. "Evelyn was out there at dawn, ordering the crew around like a dictator. She didn't give you a chance. She thinks she's untouchable," Daniel muttered. Jack hesitated, then asked, "You're taking this to court, right?" Daniel sighed. "I don't like flexing my title, but she's just started a war." Daniel wasn't just any homeowner. He was a federal judge, and Evelyn had no clue who she'd crossed. The next morning, Daniel paced his living room, phone in hand, calling the local council. The representative was sympathetic but explained tree disputes fell under HOA rules. Exactly the loophole Evelyn exploited. Daniel knew HOA legal fights could be a nightmare, but she'd gone too far. That evening, Jack returned with a flash drive. "Got footage from the street cameras," he said. "You need to see this." Daniel plugged it in and watched, stunned. The video showed Evelyn directing the crew, even shifting a property marker to make Daniel's trees appear in violation. In one clip, she sipped iced tea with a grin as the trees crashed down. "She's bold," Daniel said. "Too bold." Over the next few days, Daniel dug into Evelyn's history. He uncovered a trail of petty power plays, fining families for unapproved lawn decor, warning one neighbor over a too-loud doorbell, even cutting off another's water for refusing to repaint their mailbox her preferred tan. Then he found something bigger, Evelyn's shaky finances. The HOA budget didn't add up, landscaping costs were inflated, and mysterious admin fees kept popping up. It wasn't just control, it was theft. The kicker came when Daniel discovered an old HOA bylaw Evelyn had secretly rewritten, giving herself unchecked power over property changes without a vote. She'd slipped up. The next day, Daniel called a city official, Inspector Greg Thompson, who'd dealt with HOA messes before. After hearing Daniel out, Thompson visited the yard, shaking his head at the stumps. "She broke city code," he said. "Trees over 15 years old need municipal approval for removal." She didn't file a thing. That night, Daniel drafted an injunction. This wasn't just about his trees anymore. It was about saving the neighborhood from Evelyn's tyranny. The following weekend, Evelyn called an emergency HOA meeting at her house. Her smug grin wavered as Daniel walked in, legal papers in hand. "Something to say?" she asked, voice sugary. Daniel stepped up. "You broke city code, destroyed property without consent, and misappropriated HOA funds." Her smile twisted. "You can't prove anything." He held up the flash drive. "I've got video. The city's involved. And if you think I'm bluffing, let me introduce myself, Judge Daniel Carter." For the first time, Evelyn paled. "You're lying," she hissed. "Try me," he replied coolly. The crowd buzzed as her control slipped. Residents swapped stories of her absurd fines and threats. She was unraveling. That night, Daniel sat on his porch with Jack, beers in hand, staring at the bare yard. The missing trees stung, but the fight wasn't done. "Think she'll quit?" Jack asked. Daniel smirked. Not a chance. She's too stubborn. Jack laughed. Round 2, then. Oh, I'm ready, Daniel said, eyeing Evelyn's flickering porch light. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, Daniel woke with a headache and a gut feeling Evelyn wouldn't back off quietly. Her panic glare at the meeting lingered in his mind. People like her doubled down. Sure enough, Jack showed up with fresh footage. Evelyn canvassing the neighborhood at dawn, spinning lies to paint herself as the victim. Later, at the county records office, clerk Sarah Mills handed Daniel the HOA's financials. You're not the first to ask, she said. 2 others came in yesterday, worried. The records were damning. Evelyn had funneled money into beautification accounts, some linked to her cousin's landscaping firm. Projects she'd billed, like fence repairs, never happened. Thousands were missing. Daniel called Thompson again, who promised to probe the fraud. 2 days later, an orange violation notice appeared on Daniel's door, claiming his overgrown lawn, mowed just days ago, owed a $500 fine. Evelyn was retaliating. That night, Jack brought more footage. Evelyn scattering leaves on Daniel's yard to fake the violation. She's burying herself, Daniel muttered. He drafted a detailed injunction, citing her code breaches and fraud, and had it delivered to her door. From across the street, he watched her rip it open and hurl it down in fury. That afternoon, Thompson and 2 officials arrived at Evelyn's house. You can't barge in, she snapped. We're investigating code violations, Thompson replied. No permits for your landscaping or tree removals. She froze as he mentioned environmental laws. That evening, her emergency HOA meeting flopped. Only 3 board members showed, 2 siding against her. Word of her tactics spread, and her grip weakened. Late that night, Evelyn appeared at Daniel's door, eyes frantic. Withdraw the complaint, she demanded. Not happening, he said calmly. This isn't over, she sneered. I'll drown you in legal fees. He smiled coldly. You might want to Google who I am. I know the law, Evelyn. Keep pushing, and I'll make sure you repay every cent, fix every violation, replace every tree. She stormed off, livid. The next day, Thompson called, cities fining her thousands for the trees, environmental violations. We're pulling HOA records. She's toast. Later, police cited her at home. Her smugness faded to fear. Weeks later, Daniel watched neighbors vent at a park meeting. Tales of Evelyn's petty tyranny poured out. Towed cars, blocked mail, absurd rules. Tom nominated Daniel to lead the HOA, and despite his reluctance, he agreed. He audited the books, recovering Evelyn's $40,000 in stolen funds, and prioritized repairs she'd neglected. One night, Jack rushed in. She's back, sneaking around your yard. They caught her on camera rifling through his recycling. Confronted, she spat. You ruined everything. No, Daniel shot back. You did. She fled. A restraining order followed, and soon, formal charges hit. Fraud, property damage, harassment. In court, Evelyn's excuses crumbled. Fined, ordered to repay funds, and sentenced to community service, she left the courtroom deflated. That weekend, the neighborhood celebrated. New trees sprouted in Daniel's yard, small but growing. Months later, a moving van parked at Evelyn's house. She glanced at Daniel as she drove off, defeated. Jack clinked his beer against Daniel's. Good riddance. Yeah, Daniel agreed, watching the young trees sway. The neighborhood had healed, stronger, united, free.